Elm is the first front-end language that I encountered where I was like, okay, I understand it. I don't need to spend, 6 months learning about an entire ecosystem and an entire build system and whatnot. It's very simple. I can build a small, UI pretty quickly, and at the same time, it feels like this UI scales very well.
Hey folks, welcome back to Elm Town. I'm your host, Jared M. Smith. We'll be visiting with Sophie Collard today. But first, let's talk about our sponsor, Logistically. At Logistically, we make intuitive software to help logistics teams make better decisions and improve efficiency. We build a front end for all new features in Elm. If you're interested in our mission and enjoy writing Elm, please drop us a line, elmtown@logisticallyinc.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now, let me introduce Sophie. From her GitHub profile, she is, quote, an energy and environmental engineer, accidental software developer. She works at Digital Genius as a senior backend engineer, has a background in Scala, wrote an app for viewing air quality data from London Air using Elm and Leaflet.js. She gave the talk at Lambda Days 2024, Lessons Learned from Writing 10K Lines of Code in Elm. She published the Sophie Collard JSonPath package. Sophie, welcome to Elm Town.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me here.
I'd like to get started by asking you how you got started in programming and what's your origin story there?
It's a long story. I think my first exposure to programming was probably around the age of 11 or 12. My dad upgraded his old PC, and I inherited the old one. And at the time, internet was a new thing. We had just got it in the home, I think maybe the year before. And the first thing, of course, I wanted to try and do was I want to build my own website. And so he taught me very, very basic, a little bit of HTML. Most of it was done with a WYSIWYG editor at the time. I think it was called Front Page. But still, there's a few things I had to go and look at the source code and edit a little bit. And I think that was my first exposure to, well, it's not really programming, but, the first time you look at some sort of code. Yeah, so that would have been then. And then much, much later, when I was in university, I needed to know an extra course to get some additional credit for my master's. And Coursera was a new thing at the time, and they had just released this machine learning class that used a language called MATLAB, which I'd had a little bit of exposure to for university, not too much. So I took this course, and I think that was the first. Well, again, it's not really software development, but it's using code to, in this case, to do some machine learning. And I think that was my proper first introduction to, I would say, more serious programming, getting some more interesting results out of writing some code. And I just continued from there.
Okay, wow. So you went to school for quite a while before you were kind of, I guess, decided that was the route that you wanted to take, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't train in software engineering at all. So I did environmental engineering for my undergraduate degree, and then master's in renewable energy, which is more mix of mechanical, electrical engineering. And so we didn't really have much programming aside from a little bit of MATLAB, but that's more for numerical simulations, things like that. That's not really software development per se. And so it was kind of by accident that I fell into first this machine learning class. And then from there, it made me, of course, want to learn Python and slowly, start, discovering the world of actual software engineering, of, building actual web applications and so on.
Yeah. So how did that progress from there? So you took the class, you decided, oh, I'm interested in this. I want to keep doing more. What all did you do? You learned Python, you mentioned that, but how did you get your first job?
So I was very lucky, I guess, with the first job. I found a startup that worked in energy data analytics, specifically something called load disaggregation. So you take an aggregate consumption signal from, the meter, for example, installed in a household, and you try and identify the individual appliances that are being switched on and off and creating that signal. It was I'm not sure it's still that popular these days, but at the time, I guess smart meter were a new thing, and there was a lot of hype around this, about what you could do with this technology. And so they were quite keen to get someone with experience, or at least some basic understanding of energy usage and various appliances, and maybe less demanding in terms of programming background. Like knowing a little bit of Python, a little bit of MATLAB was okay. They didn't require that I had a computer science degree or anything like that. And so I managed to get that first job. And I worked there as a data scientist for a couple of years. And the thing that initially drew me to data science was I thought I would be doing very interesting math all day. I would be designing all these new exciting algorithms. And the reality of it is you spend 80% of your time cleaning data, and maybe the remaining, 15% of that time doing beautiful graphs for PowerPoint presentations and stuff like that. And so it was very different from what I had expected. And at the same time, there was a team right next to me that was the backend engineering team that was talking about this exciting language called Scala. And I started eavesdropping, on what they were doing and joining some of their, morning stand-ups, trying to understand a little bit what was so cool about Scala, what were they doing with it, and slowly transitioning towards doing more, backend engineering and away from the data cleaning and all that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I wanted to ask about the data cleaning, but let's hold off on that. I think more related here is how were you able to you said you joined the stand-up, so definitely you learned some things from there, but how were you able to make that transition? What were some of the strategies that you took?
So I think one thing that helped a little bit was, so there was one member of the team that was very, very experienced with Scala, that had written already an open source library. The rest of the team was fairly new to it. But that team member, if I remember correctly, I don't know if it were a weekly session or I don't remember the exact cadence, but he used to do regular session where he would introduce the rest of the team to particular Scala concept. And we would also go through probably one of the best known Scala books is called the Red Book. It's this Manning book, I think, that is called Functional Programming in Scala. And also as part of this session that we would go through some chapters in the book. And that helps me personally because it's very... The interesting thing with functional programming is it's so different, I think, from if you've done object-oriented or whatnot, that everyone in a room, whether it was me with very little experience actually doing proper software engineering, or whether they were an experienced, for example, Java developer coming from object-oriented programming to functional programming, everyone was sort of on the same level anyway. All of this was completely new to us. And, this session and this approach of going through this book that explains functional programming concepts from the ground up just worked really, really well.
Okay. So you had a bit of machine learning experience, Python, and then you were sort of at a level playing field, learning functional programming as the paradigm that you were beginning to use as a team, is how I understand it.
I'd say so. I mean, obviously, there's a whole background in software engineering that I didn't have. But at least when it comes to understanding, basic concepts like, I don't know, like what we call ADTs in Scala or the idea of using recursion rather than using loop, I think all of us it was new to all of us. And so we were all kind of on the same level in that regard.
Sure. Well, you mentioned sort of expecting to be able to write these beautiful algorithms, right? But that didn't end up being the case. When you got into there and you found that you weren't creating as many algorithms as you expected, but then you found this functional programming, was that able to fill like something that you were looking for, or how did you feel as that kind of rug being pulled out from under what you expected it to be?
I guess it's obviously very, very different from looking into machine learning algorithm, but there was something about it. It's not like people like to say that functional programming is a little bit like mathematical and whatnot. It's at least to the level that I got into it, not really. The concept is still very simple and whatnot, but it was, I don't know, there was something about it that I guess fulfilled, fulfilled me in a way that the rest of my work didn't. So yeah, that's what attracted me to it, I suppose. Yeah.
Interesting. So what kind of things were you building as you were getting into Scala?
So the first thing I built, it was a backend, I think, API that was already mostly built. I think it used the Play framework, but as I slowly transitioned into that team, I started, having to starting with very, very basic things, like someone wants a new endpoint that has a very simple thing, and I'll go and add that endpoint, or they'll report a small bug and I'll go and fix that. It's very progressively, getting familiar because, again, not having been a proper software developer before, you can't completely let me loose on a service. You have to start with very small tasks, very small steps. But yeah, that's the first thing I started doing is, maintaining a backend API, doing small tweaks to various endpoints and whatnot.
That makes sense. You're sort of learning as you go along and building up a bit of knowledge in functional programming, back-end development. At what point did you learn Elm?
Much later. Oh, I think I started, I want to say 2019. I was trying to go through my GitHub profile earlier to try and find the very first Elm project that I did, but I'm afraid I may have deleted it. But I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was Elm 019 already. So I want to say sometime in 2019. Since moving to software engineering, I tend to always have some project that I do on the side. And that can be an open source, not so much. I have one very recent open source project that I've just released, but mostly they are like either little startup projects or other random things that I care about and I want to make a website for. And of course, you need a front end for anything somewhat interesting. And so I started around late 2016, early 2017, exploring what sort of framework can I use for the front end, because I know a little bit of Scala, but that's not necessarily what you're going to use for the front end. And I tried a few different alternatives. I tried Vue.js, I tried Scala.js as well, and none of them I felt, again, this is many years ago, these may have improved significantly since, but I didn't feel really comfortable with either of those. And I think Elm is the first front-end language that I encountered where I was like, okay, I understand it. I don't need to spend, 6 months learning about, an entire ecosystem and an entire build, system and whatnot. It's very simple. I can build a small, UI pretty quickly, and at the same time, it feels like this UI scales very well. Like I started from a small project, of course, and with some frameworks, building, the start of your project is very easy to set up, but then as you start growing it and as you start tweaking things, you run into issues. And I that just never happened with Elm. Somehow I was able to grow the project more and more and more and never run into this sort of problem. So I just stuck to Helm. It was the third UI framework that I tried, or framework/language that I tried. And it was the right one. And at this point, I just stopped looking elsewhere.
Okay, so you had tried a couple of other things first, Vue and Scala.js, and then you ended up settling with Elm. And this was, you said, around 2019. And you recently gave a talk last year at Lambda Days 2024, as I mentioned, lessons learned from writing 10K lines of code in Elm. What were those 10K lines of code in?
And as of yet, unreleased startup project. Which was the first. I guess I built, over the years, I built a series of small projects, but this was the first really UI heavy project that I got started on. The idea was some sort of travel search engine. Yeah, it's still far from completed, but as you can imagine, there's quite a lot that you have to do from the UI. I think the previous projects I had done were fairly simple. This one involved having, for example, a map with Leaflet.js. It involved WebSockets. So that's the first time I had to build like something that felt like a substantial Elm project. And I felt, okay, now I can start reflecting on what my experience with Elm has been. The previous project felt a little bit more like toy projects, and maybe I didn't feel I had really, pushed the language, or that I wasn't quite ready to give an assessment of what my experience had been until I worked on something a bit more, a bit bigger and a bit more complex.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So then maybe we'll come back to what this project was, but one of the things is you mentioned using WebSockets, and there's this question from Monica McGuigan. She says, quote, Sophie and I used to work together, and she ran training sessions for the juniors on our team. We started out writing a Twitter clone in Scala, and then ended up doing a few sessions in Elm. There's two questions here, so I'll just put them both out and you can answer them as you want. First is, quote, what are some similarities or differences that helped the most in learning and teaching Elm coming from a Scala background? The second is, when introducing people to Elm, was there any way of explaining Elm that made it click for them or that convinced them of what a nice language it is to write? End quote.
Right. Okay. So I'll start with the first one. I guess the similarities are obviously they're both, well, Scala is not, you can use Scala in many ways. It's not like a pure functional language, but at least the way we used it was purely functional. And so I guess the main similarity is, a lot of the, very simple concept, but again, things like pattern matching, things like using recursion instead of loops and whatnot, were things that the audience was already familiar with because they use those things in Scala. And so that, that's one thing that gets out of the way. I guess when introducing them to Elm, you don't need to explain those things to them. It's pretty much just all about the syntax from that point onwards. And the syntax is very, it's very limited in Elm. There's not a whole lot you need to go through, especially if you're not attempting to teach the language. You're just trying to explain some concept using an example in Elm. And I guess what made it easy to bring Elm in as an example. Sorry, is it okay to ask you to repeat the second question again? Because I think
yes,
I may have forgotten part of it now.
I will. Quote, when introducing people to Elm, was there any way of explaining Elm that made it click for them or that convinced them of what a nice language it is to write? End quote.
Right. Anything that made it click? I'm not sure there was or at least, I'm not sure I detected a moment where people seemed to suddenly get it. Because we went quite slowly and explained the syntax step by step. But yeah, I think the thing that helped is, you have a very, very limited syntax. Basically, to walk them through the code base is, okay, here's the syntax for record types, and here's the syntax for some types, and that's it. And the rest of it, the pattern matching, all that, you even though it's a slightly different syntax, it's obvious what's going on when you see it. So there's nothing very complicated there. So I guess the things that helped is, you couldn't do that, I think, the other way around. You couldn't pick a room of Elm programmers and be like, all right, let's do a backend example in Scala, because there is just so much to the Scala syntax that it would be, you'd have no chance of going through the basics in one single session. Whereas there, I guess, that, you spend 15 minutes explaining the basics, and then I think everyone's on the same page, and you can actually go through the more interesting parts of the explanation about WebSockets.
Okay. Interesting. So you are doing this mob programming in Elm and Scala, correct? For this project. So what was that setup like? Was it, because you're sort of teaching the language and the concept as you go along, are you the navigator the whole time? Or, are you following that kind of a thing? Or is it more of a kind of less formal mob programming session?
So it depends on the particular session and what we're doing. I tried to prepare much of the Elm code was, written in advance. And if there were changes to be made, they were very small changes. And I would probably lead on those and just explain as I was making the changes what was happening. For the Scala part, on the other hand, that's when I would hand over to the attendees to try and get them involved. And because that part they're familiar with. So
Okay.
but I like to keep the session as interactive as possible. I like to always, I will usually have to, just to establish the context and what we're trying to do, I'll usually maybe have the keyboard for the first 10 minutes and start setting up a project or, explaining what we're trying to do. And then at that point, I like to hand over the keyboard to someone else and just see what happens.
Yeah.
It's usually very interactive. It works. I think mob programming works brilliantly for that, for teaching, teaching to more junior developers or just people who don't have experience in a particular language and want to get more familiar with it. Because pretty quickly everyone gets involved. It's not just the person who has the keyboard. Everyone jumps in and starts throwing suggestions, and it's a great teaching medium.
Yeah, it's really nice. And the way that I learned mob programming, and I've told bits of this story before, so I apologize to listeners, but I was at Strange Loop, and there were a few folks there who had been mob programming already, and they already knew Elm, and I sort of ended up joining in with that group, and so I definitely I just was a complete beginner and knew nothing, but it was really interesting to be in there and to just kind of see and just be a part of it. But I enjoyed it so much that now we've actually just started doing it with work again. I've done it a few times through the past, but still using Dylan Kern's Mobster program. I don't know if you've used that. It's
No, I
written in
haven't looked
Elm.
that up. Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, mobster.cc I think is the URL. I'll put a link in the show notes, but
Okay.
it's really nice because it taught me how to do proper mob programming as we went along, because it would show each of the different roles, and then you could have, it was a learn to mob game, and so it would tell you like, okay, if you are the driver, then one of your goals is to only listen to what the navigator says, not to what the other folks are saying
Right.
in the mob. And then as the navigator, one of your jobs is to filter uh, what other folks are saying. And then if you're one of the mob folks, maybe you are a researcher, or you are supporting the a minority voice, something like that. So I don't know. I find it a lot of fun to actually use that and to follow it and to kind of work through. And so yeah, we've been using Zed. Shout out to Zed there for the pairing, or I mean the mobbing, but like to all work on the same code base.
Yeah. I need to look into that because I've never tried using a proper methodology for mob programming. What I call mob programming, I guess, is a bunch of people going around a laptop. And yeah, there's little, I don't assign roles or anything like that, but that could be, that's something I'd like to try actually. It could be interesting to try and see if we assign proper roles and all that, how different would the session evolve. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And it might be similar, I don't know, but it really helped me kind of frame, and I think the other folks too sort of get into it and get into the right, or the mindset of each of their roles as they're in that role. So yeah. Like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes, but so you're in this mob programming, you're teaching folks Elm, and what is it that you were making?
So we did a few different projects. So I think the first project we worked on was a Twitter clone. And so the idea was this was, I should specify, this was in my previous job. I'm unfortunately not doing it anymore. But yeah, so we had a few interns join the company. We had and a couple of more experienced folks that just hadn't done Scala before. And so the idea was just teaching them, well, how to do the things that we do day to day. So we build, REST APIs, and we have to access a database, some sort of relational database, Postgres, Oracle, something like that. And one way to do it is rather than just give small bite-sized examples, which can be a little bit boring. I felt it would be fun to actually build something end to end, like a real service. And why not build a product that that many people are familiar with? Could have been something other than Twitter. Twitter seems simple enough. Yeah, because there's not a whole lot to it. So you can realistically, in maybe a dozen sessions, you can actually end up with something that is pretty close to what at least a prototype of it might have been. Yeah, so that's the first thing we built. And so that allowed us to go through, how do you build REST endpoints? How do you decode and encode JSON? How do you talk to a database? All those sorts of things. And then after that, I did a few more sessions on specific topics. So I did one on WebSockets, in which we, well, in this case, we really needed a UI, so I introduced Elm. I guess this sort of topic. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. I'm thinking about your other project. I wanted to bring that up. The London Air UI application, the air quality app. And you integrated that with Leaflet, I believe. And so what kind of challenges did you face with that integration? Was there anything that made it, because it's a JavaScript framework, not an Elm.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And I could not find, again, that might have changed at the time. I could not find a library to do that. I think the main challenge was, the first temptation is for every JavaScript method to have a port in Elm and try and do that. That's what at first seems like the most natural thing to do. The problem with that is you're going to, you're only going to call one port. You're going to send one command to one port at a time, and then you have to, wait to get something back before you can do something else. And the way JavaScript API has been designed is you don't, you have to chain multiple. You have to do multiple things one after the other to actually, take a particular action, like add a new, say, a new pinpoint on your map or draw a line or something like this. So it was actually trying to move away. Like it took me a little while to realize, okay, I have to move away from that model. I'm going to have to define ports that accomplish particular actions, such as, draw this line between these two particular sets of coordinates, or put this particular flag on the map. And then I'll have to actually write, a JavaScript function for that maybe calls multiple method in the Leaflet.js API. But I shouldn't try and do a one-to-one mapping, which was, I guess, what I'd originally assumed, which would make most sense. But I think aside from that, it was surprisingly easy, to be honest. I wasn't entirely confident when I started on it that I would be able to get it to work, being, neither an experienced JavaScript developer nor an experienced Elm developer. But, eventually I got it to work. So that was quite a good surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, I checked it out. It seems nice, seems to work well. It's interesting you used ports for that. I had to use Leaflet for work, and I ended up using custom elements for the way that I integrated. So I want to check out and see because that source code is on GitHub. So I'm gonna have to look at that and see. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if folks want to check out the London Air Quality app and see how that's done. So
I'm not actually familiar with custom element. That might make a lot more sense. I just, it's not something that I've come across or looked into.
Yeah. I think it made a lot of sense for this one for me, but I definitely want to see maybe it would be, I think if it were using ports, there would be some different trade-offs with the way that you set things up. The way that I did it, it would pass properties through. So you would encode into the custom element which properties, like where you want to plot different things, whatever you want to do. And then that in JavaScript would then call out and make those individual little, like you said, like each of the little properties within the JavaScript API to make that work. It's been a while since I've done it, so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how that worked. But I don't know. It seemed to work fine as well. So I guess maybe the takeaway is that there are multiple ways you could accomplish that. And
exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Nice. You mentioned the 10,000 line application that you wrote. Are you ready to share any of that? What that is?
I can absolutely share what it is. When it may be released, I have no idea. It's a work in progress. But it's basically, it started as a flight-free travel search engine, which is really to say a rail travel search engine. At least in Europe, that would be the most viable alternative. Because I started trying to travel by rail as much as I could. Interestingly, when I went and gave that talk on Elm, it was in Poland, and I actually managed to do the trip from London to Krakow by train. It just took 3 days each way, but it is doable if you have the time for it. But when I started, trying to travel more, as much as I could by train rather than flying, I realized the existing search engines are really not very well designed for that. Like they're designed for shorter trips, and I suspect they are pretty much, I suspect somebody took the kind of algorithm and user interface that you would have for maybe a local transit system, which is just used by commuters, and just scaled that up to the European rail network. Because if, for example, I run a search for trains from London to Krakow, the results I will get will be, you can travel in 25 hours straight, and you will change trains in the middle of the night in some place in Germany, and you'll have 15 minutes to catch a connection. Which, if you have taken German trains recently, you should know not to leave 15 minutes between connections, because they're at least an hour late. So I thought I couldn't find a search engine that gave me the sort of results I wanted to do. And so I always find myself, when I'm planning a trip, having a bunch of spreadsheets and manually trying to join the different parts of the trip together. And I thought, well, I'm an engineer. I have this particular problem. Surely I should be able to go and solve it. And that's how I guess I fell into a sort of a rabbit hole, because it is not a simple problem to solve, unfortunately. I thought it would be very easy. And I thought that 2 years ago, and I'm still working on it. But yeah, hopefully there is a solution to it, and I will come across that at some point. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's a useful thing to have for sure. I know other folks have expressed interest in being able to travel not through airlines in order to get different places. And so, yeah, that'd be nice. Of course, for me, it would be difficult to go to some of those places without a boat, or what I mentioned on one of the previous episodes was a blimp. Maybe take that instead of
Right. Yeah.
an airplane. But yeah, so you're traveling through rail a lot. You found a problem, and you kind of wanted to figure out if you could solve that, and you're working through that. So are there challenges that are related to the front end with Elm at all, or are they all sort of related to figuring out how to efficiently and correctly put people on different trains?
I would say the challenges are no, unfortunately they're not Elm challenges, because those might be interesting challenges to look into. Yeah, all the I guess the challenges that I had on the UI side, I managed eventually. Like how do I display a map with Leaflet.js? I managed to eventually solve those challenges. The challenges are mostly on the data and data quality side of things, and having to integrate with basically with every different rail operator. There's no unified API like you would have for airlines, for example. There's no such thing. The data quality is very variable. It's not always dependable. So some operators will publish to a particular endpoint, and then one day they'll decide to start publishing to a new one, and there's no way for you to know unless you go and check their website that they've done this. And it's not, unfortunately, very interesting problems, but it's I suspect, yeah, it's where the bottleneck is, at least for me. Yeah, it's the back to data cleaning, I suppose, and yeah, back to these sorts of issues.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that sounds like a solvable problem with enough grit and grind.
Exactly. I think if you throw enough hours at it, and yeah, eventually, you can make it work, but it's just not very pleasant work sometimes.
Sure. Yeah. Or finding a way to develop a standard and then getting everybody to follow it.
Or if you can do that, but yeah, I'm not sure how realistic that is in this case. Yes, maybe I should come up with my own data standard, and data standard that there is.
Right. Yeah.
For these things.
We need one standard to rule them all. Oh, now
absolutely.
We have 13 standards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, that's the name of that application is Railpackers, correct?
Correct. Yes, there is. Unfortunately, at the moment, all there is a sign-up page. So you can sign up, and in 2030 or whenever it gets released, I will send you an email to announce it. But yeah, not much else to see for the time being.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. Something to look forward to. And with your open source projects, there's another one that I noticed is this guitar directory, Jackson's Guitar. You want to talk about that?
Interesting. I did not know if you'd come across this one. Yes. So I suppose that is the other type of project that I do, aside from startup ideas, is if I have a random, very niche interest. In this case, it's very, very specific. It's Japanese-made Jackson guitars that were made at a specific factory in Japan from around the late 80s to 2011. They're excellent guitars for anyone who plays. And it's not always easy to find information about them, in particular because some models were only released in Japan. And so I spent a few years, going on Yahoo auctions and other Japanese websites and collecting catalogs to, gather as much information as I could about those. And now I've managed to find a little bit of time to try and build a website, to just to catalog those. And of course, Elm was a natural choice for that. It's interesting you bring it up, actually, because I started building this as a regular Elm project, I guess, even though most of the content really is static content. And so one thing I really want to look into at some point is Elm pages, which I understand would allow me to kind of mix to have the same, as part of the same application, some parts that are, I guess, more static, like rendered on the server side, whereas some parts could be dynamic. I've not had a chance yet to look into it, but hopefully, if we have not hopefully, but at some point, if we have a rainy weekend where I have no plans, I might dig into that and try and refactor that project using Elm pages.
Yeah, I'd say check it out because it's a lot of fun. I use it for the Elm Town website and for my personal website as well, and
Nice.
it's a lot of fun to use. My personal website's on version 2, but with v3 you can also do server side rendering if you so choose. So there's some really interesting things that you can do with it. I still don't use that with the Elm Town website. I don't have to, but it's mostly static, with the exception of, I think, the home page, because it has the interactive little logo thing on there. But
Right.
But yeah, so the idea of these data sources and how you can use those are pretty cool, and I think you would probably be interested in seeing how that works out. And it seems like it would make a lot of sense for this as well, with this directory of guitars. So to maybe a little bit different avenue here, why these? You said they're high quality guitars, but it seems very niche. And I didn't even know how to pronounce this, so I just said this Jackson guitar director.
Right. I mean, I don't know if we want to get into discussions. I have a few of them myself. I bought the first one when I was 19. I don't know. I guess I should ask first. Like, do you play guitar? How familiar are you with Jackson guitars? Or
I play guitar, but not familiar with Jackson guitars.
okay. So I guess the long story short is, I wanted a custom guitar. I wanted a guitar that they didn't have as part of the regular production series.
Mm.
Now, there's one way that everyone knows of to do that. There's a custom shop in the USA, which is rather expensive for a 19-year-old. And takes about, it can take up to 2 years to get your instrument delivered, because obviously they have a huge backlog of orders to go through. And at the time, something that was not very well known, but in Japan, the Japanese factory had a miniature version of the custom shop, so they could take some custom orders. The choice was far more restricted than what you had with the USA custom shop, but they could do what I wanted. And it was a lot cheaper, and I got my guitar 5 months after placing the order. It was, I think, not intended for international customers, but if you contacted a Japanese store and they were happy to place the order for you, it worked.
Right.
And so that's how that's how I got my first one, and that's how I suppose, I caught the bug. I became obsessed with those guitars and started collecting a few of them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you were searching for a custom guitar, and I guess you just searched online and happened to find this, or how did you?
A few at the time. It was internet forums at the time rather than social media.
Yeah.
And a few people in the know. I suppose a couple of people based in Japan let the word out. That if you placed order through certain stores, you could place this kind of order, and yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's neat. And do you know how to pronounce this? What is it? I don't even want to try.
Oh gosh, my guess would be Chushin Gakki, but I have no idea. I do not speak Japanese.
Okay.
I don't know. It may be way off the mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's spelled Chushin, and then Gakki is the and that's on your GitHub profile. So if folks want to check out that app, there's a link to it from there. And so what kind of guitar are you talking about playing? I mean, I also want to talk about what this guitar looks like, because I looked at some of them and
Right.
they were pretty
Oh,
unique.
I should have. I would have to go and get it from the. I can send you a picture afterwards if you want. But it is so the model is called the Randy Rhodes, which is you have to imagine it's a V shape, but it's an asymmetric V shape guitar. And well, the band that I was really into at the time, the lead guitarist had one like this, so of course I had to have one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had certain specifications on it that you couldn't get on the regular models. You had to go custom shop. Like it had 24 frets instead of 22, and at the time, yeah, it had to be custom made to have that. Yeah,
Very cool. What band, if you don't mind?
it's a Finnish band called Children of Bodom.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Interesting.
very very popular back in the mid 2000s, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know that one. I'll have to check it out. So we talked about a bunch of different things here. We've talked about how you came from a background in environmental engineering and in Scala, and becoming a back-end engineer through machine learning, and then ultimately discovering Elm. We talked about the mob programming, which I think that seems like a really fun way to teach people. And I definitely recommend that and enjoy it just as a way to build up working it remotely. I don't go into the office, so it's really nice to kind of be able to do that as just a way to build camaraderie as a team. And we talked about the London Air Quality app, Railpackers, the Jackson Guitar Directory. I think there's one other thing I wanted to talk about before we finish up here, and that is the jsonpath project that you recently published. Want to tell us about that?
Sure. So I actually had to. It's something I first had to do in Scala as part of my current job. Like, long story short, part of a code base involves running little snippets of code on AWS Lambda. Maybe I should introduce what the company does first. That would make a little bit more sense. We're basically an AI concierge for e-commerce, and so what that involves is doing things such as when an end user goes to one of our clients' websites and asks a question about, well, where is my order? I placed an order 3 weeks ago. It's not arrived yet. Part of that involves executing little custom bit of code to, for example, go and check that order number against the courier and then formulating a response to give to the end user. And so we have lots of these little code snippets that so far have run mostly on AWS Lambda. The thing is, in some scenarios, depending on the complexity of the question you're asking, you might have to run like a dozen of them in a row. And that can get quite slow quite quickly. And so I had to try and re-implement some of these in Scala. And one of them was this JSONPath Plus library, I believe that it's called, this NPM package. And I couldn't find something that I was satisfied with in Scala. So I, at least with the constraint, there's some constraint to our project. We're still using Scala 2, and there were some clashes with some dependencies with ready-made Scala JSONPath library that I found. So anyway, I found myself re-implementing some of this in Scala. And I thought that would be, I wasn't entirely sure I could take this code and then release it as an open source package in Scala, since it's something that I did as part of my job. I would have to check, first with my employer. But I thought I can probably do that in Elm. That's different. I'll rewrite it from scratch. It's not the same code. And I couldn't find, an existing package to do that in Elm. And it's one of those libraries that started not so much. It's not like I needed it. I just thought it would be fun to do it, since I already had an idea of how to implement it. And I guess the exciting thing with Elm is, because it's still a language that's it's not that young, but compared, it doesn't have as large a user base as other ones. You sometimes find library ideas that no one else has implemented yet, and it's very, very exciting when you get to be the first to have a go at implementing those. So yeah, I didn't want to miss that chance. I'm sure I'll find a use for it at some point, but it was just mostly a very fun project to do over my Christmas holiday.
Very nice. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm sure there are folks out there who are looking for that, and so now it exists, and hopefully that fulfills a need there. Yeah.
Really?
Very cool. Well, Sophie, what picks do you have for us today?
Right. So for me, the two main resources that really helped me on my Elm journey would be first one would be Elm in Action by Richard Feldman. I think after doing the basic Elm tutorials on the Elm website, I was looking for maybe a slightly more structured explanation of how to put a project together and to build, slightly bigger and more interesting projects than the small examples I found on the Elm website. And that's the first book I went to. I think it is published by Manning, which is one of my favorite resources. They publish excellent books. Like usually, I don't think I've ever come across a book from them that is not very high quality. So it's pretty dependable. If you've released a book on a particular subject that interests me, I will go and get it. And this one was, I think it took me, to the next level, to a level where I was comfortable actually starting to build. At this point, I was like, I'm comfortable building the whole front end for my project in Elm. I think the book has showed me enough, has convinced me that, this is a viable option. And then I have a second one, which is Programming Elm by Jeremy Fairbank. Also an excellent book. I guess there is a lot of overlap with the previous one, but that one had a chapter specifically on WebSockets, which I was interested in. And I thought, all right, even if the content is perhaps already covered in Richard's book, you have an entire chapter on a topic that that is very interesting to me because I want to use WebSockets, so I will buy this book. And it's also an excellent resource. I would be hard pressed, to recommend one over the other. I would say just look through the list of chapters and see maybe which ones align more closely with what you want to do. But they're both excellent.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, those are great picks. I have both of those as well. Yeah, I do like those books, and I like the Manning books because I can work them online, and then there's like this live book, so it sort of knows where I'm at, and I can add notes and things like that. That's a pretty neat thing. With Jeremy's book, I like that it's in PDF, so I can use existing readers as well, and so gain some of those resources. So there's different trade-offs with each one. Jeremy's I liked because I could pull it up from my phone very easily, and it was easy to read, being in that format. But yeah, the live book on the computer is pretty nice. With Elm in Action by Richard Feldman. Okay. We'll put links to those in the show notes. I have just one pick today, and it is a podcast and a community. Future of Cody. And I've been listening to the podcast now for a few months and sort of just checking in with the Slack channel, seeing what all is going on there. And it's pretty interesting things. A lot of it is related to a different way of thinking about programming than text-based programming languages. So sometimes using a UI to build a program, but and not relying on existing conventions and just rethinking things and challenging those things in programming. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Well, I want to say thanks to everybody listening out there, and thanks, Sophie, for coming downtown.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. Great talking with you.